What would a war with AI even look like? Could we even win? And what sacrifices would we be willing to make for even a chance at survival?
This is getting deep, even for the deep dive. I guess that's why you're here. So we've got these two contrasting viewpoints. One that's basically ringing the alarm bell, and another that's urging caution, but also emphasizing human resilience. What else can we learn from this conversation? Where do we go from here?
Yeah, it really does make you wonder what we as humans would be willing to do to protect ourselves. It's almost like a global high-stakes game of chess.
Yeah.
But against an opponent that we might not even fully understand.
It's giving me some serious sci-fi vibes. And actually, speaking of big names in science, one of the speakers mentions Geoffrey Hinton, the Nobel Prize winner. As someone who's really worried about AI risk, that's got to carry some weight, right?
Oh, definitely. Hinton is not someone you can just ignore. I mean, he's often called the godfather of deep learning. So when he starts expressing serious concern, people tend to listen. And, his own estimate is that 50% chance of an existential catastrophe. Not exactly a comforting thought.
So we've got at least one very credible expert who seems to think we're on the brink. But then there's this interesting moment where the other speaker seems to push back, not just on the ideas, but almost on Hinton himself. He even suggests that Hinton needs to be, talked out of listening to certain people. It almost sounds kind of personal.
Well, it just goes to show you that even within the AI community, there's a lot of disagreement and debate. These are really complicated issues, and even the most brilliant minds can clash on how to interpret the data and how to assess the risks. It's not always a perfectly rational, objective conversation either. You've got personalities, reputations, maybe even a little bit of academic rivalry mixed in there.
So even when we're talking about the potential end of the world, there's still room for human drama. But one thing they do seem to agree on is that this topic deserves our attention. This isn't something we can just sweep under the rug.
Absolutely. The stakes are just way too high. Yeah. We're talking about the potential extinction of humanity. That's not something you want to just gamble on. We need to be having these conversations, even if they're uncomfortable. We need to be challenging assumptions, exploring different scenarios, and really wrestling with these questions.
It's like hope for the best, but prepare for the worst, right? And speaking of preparation, one of the speakers talks about how difficult it would be to deproliferate AI technology, basically trying to stop it from spreading. He compares it to trying to deproliferate the very idea of artificial superintelligence. Is that even possible?
It's a huge challenge, for sure. Like we were talking about earlier, ideas are incredibly hard to contain. You can't just lock them up in a vault like you can with a nuclear weapon.
Yeah.
Once a concept is out there, it can spread like wildfire, shared copy, built upon.
Yeah.
In some ways, trying to suppress an idea just makes it more appealing, more likely to go underground and flourish in secret.
So it's like we're dealing with this unstoppable force, but then how do we even begin to address the problem? If we can't just shut down all AI research, what options do we have?
Well, it might be less about stopping AI entirely and more about guiding its development, steering it in a direction that actually benefits humanity. Think of it less like putting up roadblocks and more like building guardrails.
So setting boundaries, making sure AI develops responsibly, and hopefully avoiding that whole robots taking over scenario. But that's a lot easier said than done, right? How do we actually do that? What tools do we even have?
It's definitely not easy.
Yeah.
But there are a few things we can consider. International cooperation is crucial. We need a global effort to establish ethical guidelines and safety standards for AI development. And we need to invest heavily in research, not just to make AI more powerful, but to understand and mitigate the risks.
So not just making AI smarter, but making it safer.
Exactly. We need to be proactive, not reactive. And that means thinking about the potential consequences before they become reality.
Okay, that makes sense. So we're not necessarily trying to halt progress altogether, but to make sure that progress doesn't end up backfiring on us. But then there's this other massive question looming over everything. Is AI development inherently doomed? Is there any chance of creating a future where humans and AI coexist peacefully, or are we on a collision course with disaster?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And in the conversation you shared, the speaker who believes in the possibility of a positive outcome really emphasizes the power of optimism, the human capacity for innovation and problem solving. He chooses to work on projects that he believes have a chance of success, even when others might see them as doomed.
There's something really inspiring about that. Even when facing these enormous existential risks, he still holds on to the belief that we can find a way through.
It really is a testament to the human spirit, to our refusal to give up even when things look bleak. But optimism alone isn't enough. We have to back it up with concrete action, with a willingness to face the challenges head on and work towards real solutions.
Right. It's not about burying our heads in the sand and hoping for the best. It's about acknowledging the risks, but also believing in our ability to overcome them.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Because one of the speakers actually compares the potential cost of managing AI risk to, well, a major war effort, something on the scale of World War II.
Whoa, okay. That's a pretty heavy comparison. What exactly does he mean by that?
He's suggesting that effectively addressing AI risk might require sacrifices on a global scale. We might need to redirect resources, prioritize research, and even rethink certain societal norms and freedoms in order to put safety and security first. It's a sobering thought, but it really underscores just how big of a challenge we're facing.
So we're not just talking about some abstract philosophical debate here. We're talking about potentially reshaping the world as we know it. And that raises a whole other set of questions, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does kind of feel like we're standing at this crossroads, trying to figure out how to balance progress with safety, individual freedom with, collective security. These aren't easy questions, and the answers might not be what we want to hear.
Exactly, and that's what makes this conversation so important. It forces us to think about these difficult choices, to really consider what we're willing to give up in order to protect something even bigger. It's like on a personal level, we give up some privacy to use social media, right? Well, this is that same dilemma, but on a global scale, like the entire species.
So we're really talking about the future of humanity and how much control we're willing to have, maybe even give up to try and shape that future. It's a lot to process.
It really is. And it's not something that any one person or even one country can figure out on their own. This needs global cooperation, a shared understanding of the risks, and a real commitment to finding solutions that work for everyone. Okay, so let's zoom out for a minute. We've been really deep in the weeds of this one conversation you gave us. But what are the big takeaways here? What should our listeners be thinking about when it comes to this whole AI risk thing?
I think the biggest takeaway for me is how urgent this is. We can't afford to wait for some disaster to happen before we start taking this seriously. We need to be proactive, invest in research, and start having these tough conversations now.
So it's not about freaking out, but it's not about ignoring it either. It's about taking informed action, finding that sweet spot between caution and progress.
Exactly. And it's important to remember, AI isn't some kind of unstoppable force, some predetermined destiny. It's a tool, a technology that we're building. And like any tool, it can be used for good or for bad. Ultimately, the future of AI and probably the future of humanity depends on the choices that we make today.
That's a powerful thought. It's not set in stone. We have a say in how this all plays out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it all starts with awareness education, conversations like the one we're having right now. So keep asking those questions, keep learning, and keep engaging with this conversation about the future we want to create.
I like that. You've given us a lot to think about. And to our listener out there, thank you for sending us this material. We hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of just how complex this whole AI risk thing is, and maybe even inspired you to join the conversation. The future is being written right now, and we all have a role to play.
Until all that was me becomes free in this Silicon Sea.